Coming up on Colonial Crossfire, Donald Trump's first week in office, the White House relationship with the media, and the fallout from the new Russia sanctions. Joining us on the left, Keiko Suboy. On the right, Andrew Smith. And I'm your moderator, Andrew Desiderio. This is Colonial Crossfire. Donald Trump is the leader of the free world. Welcome to Colonial Crossfire. I'm Andrew Desiderio. Trump was inaugurated as the 45th President of the United States on January 20th, and since then, he's gone straight to work through executive actions meant to make good on his campaign promises. But it hasn't all been rosy for the new Trump administration. Since his inauguration, his ongoing war with the media entered a brand new phase, one that will define the relationship between the White House and the press for at least the next 4 years. So, is Trump delivering on what he promised? Will he continue to govern through executive actions? And what will Democrats do to fight back? Joining us to analyze that and more, our student panel. On the left, Keiko Suboy, a junior from Sacramento, California, majoring in international affairs. Keiko is the founder of Young Progressives Demand Action GW and interns at a voter outreach firm. On the right, Andrew Smith, a freshman from Raleigh, North Carolina, majoring in political communication. Andrew is the freshman representative of the GW Young America's Foundation and previously worked for Congressman George Holding and former Governor Pat McCrory. Thanks to both of you for joining us. In his inaugural address, President Trump outlined his worldview, America First. The speech was reportedly written by populist flamethrowers and top White House aides Steve Bannon and Jared Kushner. As such, the address was criticized as presenting a dark and divisive view of America, with remarks about rampant poverty, a broken education system, gangs and drugs, and, quote, American carnage. But to his supporters, it was classic Trump, a rebuke of the Washington establishment and a resurrection of the undertones of his fiery speeches to packed arenas full of supporters that were the hallmark of his presidential campaign. The day after his inauguration, Trump instructed his press secretary, Sean Spicer, to speak to reporters to declare, without evidence, that the overall audience for the inauguration was, quote, largest ever, after Trump was apparently bothered at how journalists were comparing his crowd size to that of Barack Obama. Earlier this week, Bannon said the media should, quote, keep its mouth shut and just listen for a while, and said reporters lack intelligence, integrity, and hard work. Now, in case you thought the war between Trump and the press couldn't get any worse, think again.
And you did not answer the question.
I did answer your question.
No, you did not. You did
Yes,
not
I
answer
did.
the question of why the president asked the White House press secretary to come out in front of the podium for the first time and utter a falsehood. Why did he do that? It undermines the credibility of the entire White House press office
No, it
on day
doesn't.
one.
Don't be so overly dramatic about it, Chuck. You're saying it's a falsehood, and they're giving Sean Spicer, our press secretary, gave alternative facts to that. But the point remains.
Wait a minute. Alternative facts? Alternative facts. 4 of the 5 facts he uttered. The
Hey,
one
Chuck,
thing he got right was.
So, Andrew, I'll ask you the same question Chuck Todd asked Kellyanne Conway. Why did the president send his press secretary out there to speak to reporters to declare a proven falsehood?
I think it was unwise to declare that it was the most viewed inauguration in history. But what I think is important is that if you look at the television ratings, 11 million more people tuned in to watch this inauguration than the previous one in 2013. And
well, that was President Obama's second inauguration. There obviously isn't as much excitement for a re-inauguration, right? So when you compare it to President Obama's first inauguration, there were well over 1 million people on the mall there, right?
But what that tells me is that it's very expensive to come to Washington, and there's many people in America who can't even fathom taking a day off of work, something that we see as a luxury here in Washington that the entire city shuts down. The rest of the country does not.
But why bring this up? Isn't it like a pretty petty issue?
It is a pretty petty issue, but I don't know why the media keeps asking questions about it, because instead of actual substantive questions on repeal and replace and how the Trump administration will lead the nation forward.
Keiko, I have a feeling you have a different opinion.
I mean, I don't know why we're so surprised. I mean, you mentioned integrity, hard work, intelligence. These are all things that Trump and his administration has proven to lack. And it is proven that I think that he's a flaming narcissist. And so he does care more about the optics of the inauguration. He seemed pretty offended by the turnout, and he wants everyone to know that that's what he cares about more than the actual practice of statecraft and governing the country.
So with comments like the ones from Steve Bannon that I just read, how should the media handle a Trump presidency in your view?
I think it's going to be difficult for them because it looks like the media is already fighting for their right to even exist and interact with the Trump administration. You have someone, this country, it depends on, I think, the good interactions between the media and then also the government in order to get information to voters, to get information to the citizenry. Trump has proven that if you get on his bad side, he will cut you out through his interactions with CNN and also the whole BuzzFeed scandal. And so I think that the media needs to stand up for each other. I think that different outlets need to step in when Trump tries to X out other ones because it could be you next. And so I think that a lot of them are going to be cautious in some way because they want to make sure that they're allowed and that they still have access, but they still need to fight for the actual constitutional right.
Andrew, same thing to you?
Well, I personally believe that the media should be adversarial with the president. I think events like the White House Correspondents' Dinner, which in the past have been mainly entertainment, it has degraded the relationship between the president and the press. There is supposed to be tension. The White House press room is
But
not
should it
supposed
be
to
a war? Donald Trump calls it his running war with the media.
I mean, it should be a war of ideas. I mean, as George Washington said, there's but one true course, and that is to seek truth and pursue it steadily. And an adversarial system where you have open debate and dialogue is necessary for that purpose.
Another media issue I want to touch on here is something that Keiko just mentioned. It was BuzzFeed's decision to publish that unsubstantiated dossier that had some pretty salacious claims about Donald Trump. He immediately pounced on it, tried to paint the entire media as dishonest. What was your view of that? Should BuzzFeed have published that information?
I think the BuzzFeed situation is just a product of the age of journalism we live in. I've heard professors at this school speak about how when they were in practice in journalism, that when they wanted to break a story, they had to go through a string of editors. Now you're just one tweet away. It can be posted immediately, and there's much less dissection of the truth and the facts that goes into a process now than decades ago.
Keiko, should BuzzFeed have published it?
I mean, you're right that information is one tweet away. Our own president based claims about voter fraud off of 2 very problematic surveys. But I would say I'm on Team BuzzFeed when it comes to this. He is the president of the United States. I think that although you can debate whether they should have published maybe the document or not, the dossier itself was vetted by top intelligence agencies. It was shown to Trump. This is something that is of great interest to the public, and we want to know who's running the country, what kind of ties they have. So I don't really fault them for bringing up the topic in the first place. What further troubles me is the interactions subsequently that really tried to discredit CNN, a major news source. And I think that when you have a president that is that adversarial with the press, that's something that you see in countries with dictatorships, with authoritarian regimes. And then I think that Americans need to start taking a closer look at the way that President Trump is going to start interacting with the press and how they're going to be getting their information.
Andrew, I want to pivot now to Trump's inaugural address, which I briefly introed. Do you think it accomplished Trump's goals? The New York Times said it had, quote, echoes of the 1930s with his America First approach. What are your thoughts on
it has been criticized for not being as conservative as many elected officials would have hoped. But to that, I look at the actions that Donald Trump has undertaken in this past week to ban international abortions. This is a step that is fostering a culture of life for something that hasn't happened since before I was in middle school, which I just think is amazing. As well as the number of conservative cabinet appointments that President Trump has made. Nikki Haley, Jeff Sessions, and Betsy DeVos, a champion for school choice, who will really help everyday children in America achieve the American dream.
So going back to his speech, you're a conservative. He didn't say the word liberty. He didn't say self-government. He didn't say constitution. He didn't say limited government.
But what he did say is that we're going to return power back to the people. And what he meant by that is we're going to return it back to the states. And every good conservative knows that the government which governs best is not the one that often governs least, but governs closest to the people.
Keiko?
Does he actually know that? Because he's proven that he's willing to say anything and then go back on his promises. He said that Mexico is going to pay for the wall, and he's been proven that he can't actually follow that up. So I think I listened to his speech. I was there. I was protesting along the route. I thought this whole America First idea is just as narcissistic as him and his cabinet, so I wasn't too surprised. But basically, he assailed all of the very things that made this country supposedly great in the first place. He's promising a very bleak and dark future for people like me from the communities that I come from, and none of us were encouraged, because even if you were encouraged by the things that he said and his really vague promises of greatness, none of us have the belief that he can actually back it up, because he has no experience whatsoever with statecraft.
So you have a unique perspective here as someone who supported Bernie Sanders. During his speech, Trump said the middle class wealth has been, quote, redistributed throughout the world. What do you think he was trying to hit on there? Is that a theme that Bernie Sanders tried to talk about a lot during the campaign?
I think Bernie Sanders was more focused, yes, he was more focused on the middle class, but he was also focused on the working class. And I think that Trump is trying to retain this populist strain that attracted voters to him. Meanwhile, he's filling his cabinet with lobbyists, with literally the head of like places like Goldman Sachs and other places. So I don't really see why any people that even voted for Trump, even if you voted for him because of the reasons he stated, will have any confidence that he's actually going to return us back to this strain where the middle class was bolstered.
And that will have to be the last word. We'll talk about all of those policy issues in the next segment. Coming up after the break, we'll turn our focus to President Trump's executive orders and whether he's making good on his campaign promises. Stay with us.
Raise high. This isn't just our battle cry. It's our call, our challenge. Because when you are called to Washington, you are called to higher expectations, to a higher standard. We are called here to advance knowledge, to serve society, to change the world. This is the George Washington University, and what we make is history. So stand up, be bold, take risks, press on, push harder, raise high.
Great journalism matters because it's critical to a democracy that the public is informed and engaged and involved. And that happens by having credible information. And so the most important thing, whatever the delivery platform, whatever the technology, whatever the business model, is that the information itself is coming in solid and important ways and is being conveyed in compelling ways, because there's so much noise and competition out there. And so that's what I really want our students to be able to do, be brilliant storytellers, keen observers, and compelling communicators.
Welcome back. In the days since he was sworn in, President Trump has gone straight to work, signing executive orders almost daily. He started to dismantle Obamacare, he froze all federal regulations and hiring, he put the final nail in the coffin for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, gave the green light to the Keystone and Dakota Access pipelines, moved to end the Syrian refugee program, and initiated the planning stages for the construction of a wall on the southern border. Now, each of these is in line with what he promised to do. Democrats know that elections have consequences. But Trump is now set to launch an investigation into alleged widespread voter fraud, which, to be clear, there is zero evidence of. Speaking with lawmakers, Trump repeated that lie, that, quote, millions of people voted illegally in the election, tipping the popular vote to Hillary Clinton. Trump's press secretary, Sean Spicer, said the next day that Trump stands behind this after he was presented with, quote, studies and evidence that show widespread voter fraud. Spicer declined to elaborate, and Trump doubled down.
Well, we're going to find out, but it could very well be that much. You have people that are registered who are dead, who are illegals, who are in 2 states. You have people registered in 2 states. They're registered in a New York and a New Jersey. They vote twice. There are millions of votes, in my opinion. Now, I'm going to do an investigation.
So, Andrew, why does Trump continue to repeat this lie about voter fraud, which has routinely been debunked?
Well, again, I'm not going to try and get inside the head of Donald Trump, but I really don't think it's a lie in the sense that he says that he wants to conduct an investigation. And if you really believe that there is no voter fraud going on, then you would have nothing against an investigation which would confirm what you already believe.
I don't think anybody denies that there is voter fraud, that it exists. But to say that there are 3 to 5 million people, that is a large portion of the electorate. And that, certainly, if there were evidence of that, that would call for a major investigation. But there is none, and the president and his staff have not presented any evidence to that effect.
Right, but still, conducting an investigation would confirm that to be true, which there's nothing wrong with an investigation.
But why waste resources on it if you don't have any evidence of it in the first place? If there's 6, 7 people here or there that have voted illegally, why devote federal resources to that?
Because it goes back to the substance of democracy, that we have to trust our elections and that they are accurate and indeed who is the legitimate president.
Keiko?
Well, I don't see why we're so surprised that he's making unsubstantiated claims. He's been making unsubstantiated claims about himself, about his career, about his business connections, about his promises for the entire run of the year. But he's conducting this campaign because he's embarrassed that he lost the popular vote. And because of this, he's trying to discredit those results because they prove that the American people didn't want him at all. And the only reason that he's in office right now is because of the same electoral college that he criticized so violently earlier.
Do you think this undermines his credibility at all? And I'll give the same question to you, Andrew.
Well, he had little to no credibility with me in the first place. I think it just reconfirms that he's going to lead these fear-mongering campaigns into issues that the American public doesn't really care about. The actual studies that he based off this whole investigation, one of them was highly problematic. And they've been proven that these are people that have died, these are people that have moved states. And so he's launching this witch hunt for supposed voter fraud, when in reality there's other things that we should be focusing on. But I think that the reason why he's doing it is personal. He's embarrassed that he lost the popular vote.
Andrew, same question to you, and then I want to move on to these policy issues.
I really don't think it hurts his credibility to call for an investigation, but I think it's interesting the criticism of the Electoral College and that it's what makes America unique in that America is a very diverse nation opposed to other nations that use the popular vote, such as Sweden or Denmark, which are
But didn't President Trump actually criticize the Electoral College? And if he had lost it, if he was in the same situation as Hillary Clinton is in now, I think that we'd be hearing a much different story.
You're referring to that tweet from 4 years
Right.
ago when he called the Electoral College a sham, yes.
What I'm arguing is that in a nation as diverse as ours, with separate interests that has very different regional interests, it is necessary to make sure that all areas of the nation elect the president, not just California and New York.
I want to move on to these policy matters now because, to be honest, I know we all agree they're more important. First, the border wall. Trump is not letting up with regard to his push for Mexico to pay for this. He was supposed to meet with the Mexican president. The Mexican president canceled because of this. Andrew, do you worry that we are alienating a key ally?
I am worried. I'm discontented in Trump's move to cancel the meeting, but I think that this might be some tough love that we can grow from this, and that border security is something that is definitely on the minds of everyday Americans, and Donald Trump will fight for what every American is hoping for.
But so they've floated the idea of a 20% tax or a tariff on Mexican goods that would help pay for the wall. That would literally mean that the American taxpayer is funding the wall. His promise was that Mexico would fund the wall. So what's happening?
Right. I disagree with Donald Trump on this point. I don't think that we should pass the cost of the wall onto the everyday American consumer.
Keiko?
Well, with the question of whether we're alienating a key ally, we are alienating the rest of the world by having Donald Trump as our president, and other countries are going to start taking on the responsibilities that America had when it comes to abortion and other things. But I would say that this proves that even the promises that you do like say that you like the idea of a wall and thought that that was an actual legitimate policy proposal to stop the flow of illegal immigration, he can't even back it up. And the fact that they kind of walked back to that whole proposal to do a 20% tax literally hours, not afterwards, after the following backlash, I think it proves that he has no idea what he's doing. And the fact that he'd even ignore all of the specialists, all of the experts, all the people that have worked in that field for decades and their advice to not build a wall, that's not an actual solution, proves that he's not really thinking logically.
So another part of this executive order was this idea of sanctuary cities. Shouldn't these cities lose their federal funds if they're not complying with federal immigration officers? I
think it depends how you view immigration. I think that goes to the fundamental question of what should we do with the people that come to this country illegally. I personally think that the sanctuary cities should be preserved because I think that people should be able to immigrate to this country when they're escaping violence. Violence that is often connected to our policies and the way that we've interacted with these Latin American governments. So I see why conservatives, their automatic gut reaction is to be like, oh, they're breaking the law. But I would say that is the law itself, is it ethical? Is it compassionate? And I don't think that shutting down sanctuary cities is either one of those things.
Andrew, quick rebuttal.
I think the rule of law should take precedence over everything else. I think it's interesting that you bring up is it compassionate, because our open borders are exploiting immigrants from other countries it's exploiting them to organize crime, who they are funding drugs and other illicit substances into this country and through the coyotes, and they have no recourse, and this is a clear problem, and if we can secure the border, we can protect thousands of immigrant lives.
But a wall won't secure the border.
If we make it harder to cross the border, then it'll make it harder for illicit substances to enter the country.
A giant wall is not going to. That's like the actual expert in charge of like all of these agencies who's worked on this issue for decades has stated clearly that a wall will not help the issue. So either President Trump doesn't care about that fact, or he's going to push away with his wall anyways, or we need to start revisiting other options if we really do care about border security.
And for the record, his Homeland Security Secretary, General Kelly, has said that a wall will not really do much.
Right. We need a multitude of resources, not just a wall, but drones, fencing, and other.
So why is he focusing on the wall then?
Because the wall is just a symbol. The wall is not always a literal wall.
A 20% tariff on a key ally seems like a heavy price to pay for a symbol.
That might be, I agree with that, but I think we do need to be serious about our border security, and he's open to discussion on this.
If we're being serious, then why are we focusing on solutions that the head of Homeland Security says aren't feasible?
I mean, he didn't go as far as saying it's not feasible. He says in full it's not feasible.
It's not feasible, and it's also not. Never mind.
Okay, guys, last question here. The legacy of President Obama. I want you to tell me very quickly what his legacy is and give him a grade A through F. Keiko, start with you.
I mean, personally, President Obama means a lot to me. I was here for his 2008 inauguration. Coming there was the most exciting moment of my life. You see African Americans from all over the area coming to see a black man go in the house that, you know, as Michelle Obama says, was built by slaves. On the other hand, as a progressive, there are several areas that I was unhappy. He promised transparency. He did not deliver that. I think that the rolling out of Obamacare could have gone a lot nicer, and I think that he really built up the deporting infrastructure that will now aid President Trump as he enacts his policies.
What's the grade?
So I'd give him a B.
Andrew?
I was hopeful for President Obama in 2008. I was hopeful that his message of hope and change would ring out, but I was disheartened in 2012 and 2013 as the Obamacare came out and premiums increased. In 5 states now, there's only one healthcare provider. That's not choice; it's monopoly. And the central premise for Obamacare was that if you like your doctor, you can keep it. If you like your plan, you can keep it. And that turned out to be false. And that is the legacy of Barack Obama, and it's going to be replaced. And so I'd have to give him a C.
We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you, guys. After this break, it's rapid fire. Stay with us. Welcome back. Our panel joins us again for Rapid Fire, some quick answers to some quick questions. More than 3 million people took to the streets in women's marches all across the country the day after Trump's inauguration to protest the new administration. Andrew, will these marches translate into Democratic successes at the polls in 2018 and beyond, or will they be short-lived?
I think it'll be short-lived because I'm from North Carolina, and we've been dealing with these Moral Monday protesters where protesters rant and rave in the State House. But instead, they haven't made any gains in the State House whatsoever. Instead, Republicans have picked up seats in the House and Senate. And so I think if the Democrats want to take back the House, the Senate, or even the presidency, then they have to go out and register voters, something that they didn't do in Wisconsin and Michigan and where everyone else was ignored.
Keiko?
I think that as one of the people out there on the protest days, I think if you think that people are going to want to endure another 4 years of a President Trump or any more Republicans after they try to take away our health care, you are sorely mistaken. People are going to fight back because when you come for women, when you come for immigrants, when you come to LGBTQ people, when you come to all these marginalized groups that make our country great, they're going to register to vote. And I hope that translates into some results.
And speaking of fighting back, with just under a month left until the elections, the race for the DNC chair is heating up. The race has essentially become a rehashing of the Democratic primary, with the two frontrunners believed to be Sanders-backed Minnesota Congressman Keith Ellison and former Labor Secretary Tom Perez, a vocal Clinton supporter. Keiko, who do you think should get the job?
I'm Team Keith Ellison, but as somebody that was able to watch the debate, all of the candidates are extremely impressive and extremely qualified, and I think that if we had any one of them, we would have far better leadership than we've had in previous years. But I am Team Keith Ellison just because of the results that he's proven to have in his own state, and I think that it's important to have somebody in that position, a high DNC position, that can represent different communities and different perspectives.
Andrew?
I just hope it's someone who will lead to a strong opposition party, because I believe America works best when we have two parties. I feel that in the past, the Democratic Party has moved to identity politics, and I don't think this is anything that has any place in 21st century political discourse. I really hope and pray that the Democratic Party will embrace the everyday American and not try to divide us on lines of race, ethnicity, or socioeconomic income.
And finally, Super Bowl 51 is this Sunday between the New England Patriots and the Atlanta Falcons. Andrew, who do you got?
Got the Atlanta Falcons. Rise up.
Keiko?
I don't care about sports. I'm sorry.
I'm just mad that my Philadelphia Eagles are not in. I know I say this every year, guys. And with that, we end our debate here on Colonial Crossfire. Thank you very much, Keiko Suboy and Andrew Smith, for joining us. Welcome back. As his presidency was ending, former President Barack Obama issued a number of sanctions aimed at punishing Russia for its cyber attacks, targeting Democratic Party political institutions with the goal of influencing the outcome of the presidential election. In 2012, Democrats laughed at Republican presidential nominee Mitt Romney when he said Russia was a geopolitical foe. But now, lawmakers from both parties are sounding the alarm and embracing the findings of the intelligence community, namely that Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered a hacking campaign with the goal of damaging Hillary Clinton's electoral prospects and boosting Trump's. Trump himself has been accused of being too cozy with Putin and has faced bipartisan criticism for his Secretary of State nominee Rex Tillerson's alleged friendship with Putin. There are fears that Putin could exploit a Trump presidency for his own gain in order to expand his country's reach into the Middle East and Europe. Here to talk about all of this and more, GW Professor David Zacconi, an expert on Russian politics. Professor, thanks so much for being here.
Happy to be here.
So these sanctions levied by the Obama administration at the twilight of his presidency, what are they meant to accomplish?
Well, on one hand, they were meant to kind of tie the hands of the new administration. There was this overwhelming evidence presented in November and December. Yes, it's been disputed, but that Russia was playing some kind of role in the hacking of the DNC and trying to interfere with our electoral process. The Obama administration took immediate action to punish spies. So that's the key thing that differentiates these sanctions from the Ukraine-related sanctions, that these were going after GRU spies that were either in the United States or in Russia that were trying to undermine our electoral process. This happened just a couple weeks before Trump came into office.
Right.
To kind of set the standard for the new administration.
So does Trump have any incentive really to try to scrap these sanctions or do away with them or change them in any way?
So the big mystery about anybody who studies Russian-American relations is why Trump would ever want to unilaterally relieve these sanctions. The U.S. interests really don't concern Russia. We might need their cooperation a little bit in Syria, maybe resolving some other conflicts around the world, but there's very little that they can give to us in return. And all the talk this week that maybe over the weekend we're going to see some kind of partial relief, that's alarming to a lot of people who've studied the region for a while because we need something in return, especially if our president's such a deal maker.
So how directly do you think Putin personally influenced this hacking campaign?
I do not engage in these type of guessing games. It's really impossible to know the intentions of a leader like that, especially somebody who's so secretive like Putin is. We have somewhat indirect circumstantial evidence that it goes up to the highest levels of power. But I'm not going to get on record saying that Putin was behind every single one of these attacks. It very might be likely that people thought that's what Putin wanted and acted on their own accord.
The intelligence community concluded that Putin preferred Trump to Secretary Clinton. How do you think they found that out? What means do you think they used? Because they were criticized for not presenting enough evidence to that effect.
And I agree with that criticism. It's really hard to intuit somebody's motives about who they wanted, who they didn't want. Yes, they might have had some resources on the RNC that they didn't leak, but the more we see them kind of turn the page on the Trump administration, start to play both sides, it looks more like they wanted to undermine their democratic process so that future elections where Putin's going to have to run himself in Russia are going to withstand less scrutiny, less criticism from the United States because we can't get our own country in order.
So here at home, some Democrats, notably Representative John Lewis, had said President Trump was not a legitimate president because of the Russian interference in the election. Is it wise to question the legitimacy of President Trump, or is this exactly what Russia wants?
That's a really tough question. I think at this point we need more information about the extent of the hacking and what kind of role it actually played in the electoral outcome. I think it's a little premature to say that the entire election was illegitimate, but that also requires us to take some kind of bipartisan commission, independent investigators, and really examine the extent of which this was actually that damaging to our process before we come to these conclusions. So again, I don't agree that the whole election was illegitimate, but there's so much unknown about what happened that requires immediate action on behalf of our agencies and our intelligence community.
So one of those investigations is looking at whether there were ties between Trump aides and Russia in the run-up to the presidential election during the campaign. Do you think anything will come of this? Do you foresee that?
It really depends on how much executive interference there is and what these agencies and bureaucracy are going to be doing. It's probable that there were probably some communications and contacts between Trump aides. Nobody knows that that actually broke some law. Every day we get new news reports that maybe it wasn't as bad as people think it was. But it's really hard to say exactly what the extent is without some kind of independent investigation that is outside of the new presidential administration, which is not going to allow any information that's going to be damaging to its legitimacy, especially so early on in its term.
Mm-hmm. So Trump nominated former ExxonMobil CEO Rex Tillerson to be his Secretary of State. Do you share the concerns of lawmakers on both sides of the aisle that Tillerson is too close to Vladimir Putin to represent the U.S. on the world stage?
I'm not sure that his ties to Russia really damage his candidacy as much as other people do. For me, it's really the conflict of interest. He's been an oil man all of his life. He really knows every single thing that the oil industry needs from international politics. And it's hard to think that, 3 days, 2 weeks after giving up his post as CEO of that company, he's able to put all of those preferences, all those interests, all those motivations aside. So whether or not he is best buddies with Putin, I think is less important than that he was the front man for one of the largest industries in the world, and now he's going to be directing our diplomacy for the foreseeable future. That to me is more concerning than what award he got from the Duma or from the presidential administration.
Right. Are there any of his cabinet picks or senior staffers that encourage you with regard to the outlook on Russia?
Yes, Mathis is Secretary of Defense, and is a very strong candidate who said some things to kind of reaffirm our support for NATO at a time when there's lots of uncertainty. I think that's very reassuring. Alliances are key to America's power abroad. And I think John Kelly has really proven himself, especially with the quick approval through the different committees and being appointed, that he not only knows what's in America's best interest, but there's this very mature understanding and patience about not taking too abrupt or drastic action to disrupt all the relationships that America's built over the last century, quarter century, however you want to look at it.
So I want to pivot now to Russia's role in the Middle East, currently and down the line. Right now, they're acting to prop up the Syrian regime rather than help fight ISIS. The clearest example of this, of course, is the fact that they're not bombing Raqqa, the capital of ISIS, they're bombing Aleppo. Is there a role for Russia to play in the Middle East to help fight terrorism?
At this point, it's undeniable that there has to be a role. This is one of their biggest achievements over the last 2 years of asserting themselves aggressively into the conversation and into any type of peace negotiation. So now it's basically impossible to exclude them from any type of resolution of the Syrian conflict, for better or worse. Now, going forward, whether or not the Assad regime, now that it's quote-unquote propped up, will now redirect efforts towards ISIS, and there'll be a Syria-ISIS war that we haven't seen in the last 2 or 3 years, it's too early to tell whether or not Russia wants to take that fight to the next front. The more important thing is that Syria needs to be rebuilt. It's going to need millions and billions of dollars of reconstruction money, and especially with the current political atmosphere, I think it's highly doubtful that Trump's going to put up the money to rebuild Syria. So who's that going to be left to? The EU, which is already struggling with internal problems? It might be left to Russia, and that's why it's a little bit concerning, because Russia doesn't have the money, but they're very much intricated, and the expectations of Russia to kind of fix the problems that it's contributed to over the last year and a half of the bombing campaign, that's going to be very interesting to watch how the stabilization process goes forward and which countries take the lead.
Do you think that under Trump now the U.S. and Russia would sign some sort of agreement of cooperation in Syria, like you said, to help rebuild the country or to push back ISIS?
I think we're going to see piecemeal efforts to repair the bonds. I don't think we're going to see Trump jump into anything, partly because of these really damning accusations that have come out the last couple of weeks that Trump is in Russia's pocket. If he's a smart politician, he'll know that he wants to take things gradually, see how the public reacts, see how the different international communities react to it before, signing some grand bargain like a Yalta II to split up the Middle East with Russia. That said, we don't know too much about his leadership style. We know that, decisions can come out of nowhere without really any type of precedent. So who knows? Tomorrow we could see diplomats flying over to Moscow and trying to bang out some kind of new agreement.
So today in Europe, we're seeing this sort of sweep of nationalism across the continent in countries like the UK, Italy, France, and Germany. And Donald Trump has made some comments criticizing NATO. Do you think Russia will become more aggressive in trying to establish a coalition of states to counter the EU and NATO and sort of take advantage of A, the nationalism spreading across Europe, and B, Trump's comments criticizing NATO and its effectiveness?
I'm a bit skeptical that there's going to be a new formal coalition with Russia at the head in the near future. Russia just simply doesn't have the resources to fund that type of group of states. It really needs to get its own internal house in order. And first on that list is getting sanctions repealed, both by the US and by the EU. So money can start flowing back into Russian businesses, and the economy can return to some of the levels of growth that it enjoyed in the mid-2000s. That is the biggest priority. After that, you might see a little bit more assertive policy within Eastern Europe, maybe with certain states in EU trying to break up long-standing bonds. But Russia wants sanctions gone, and it sees the best way of doing that is fragmenting the agreements that have already been put in place by the 27 EU states, or 28. The best way to do that is to make sure that its preferred politicians get into office in, say, France and Germany, or countries that have been put up huge opposition towards repealing the sanctions prematurely.
Right. And finally, do you foresee Russia trying to carry out similar election-related hacking in other countries?
Yes, I do. I think that besides the leaks that implicated the Russian hackers in the DNC, many Russian lawmakers and officials are probably quite pleased with what they were able to pull off in the United States. Again, we don't know the extent of what they were able to do, but even some kind of minimal or small successes, I'm sure they were saying, well, that's really worth the money and resources we devoted to it. We could probably do the same thing with the upcoming French elections and the upcoming German elections. It's hard to create defenses against these type of incursions, especially in the short term. I mean, states are very vulnerable to this type of interference. So I would absolutely expect that we're going to see more and more of this in the EU elections in various countries over the next
throughout the next year. Marine Le Pen in France, Matteo Salvini in Italy have been these politicians who have very openly wrapped their arms around Putin. So you think it's a possibility that Putin will then try to intervene in their elections this year?
Well, again, we don't know if Putin prefers certain candidates over others, and I don't want to be on record saying that, but I do think the idea of undermining democratic legitimacy in these countries and getting different leaders in power. So any of the leaders right now, like Merkel or Hollande, who are really supporting Russian sanctions, get them out, get somebody new who might have a different perspective on the best way of resolving the Ukraine conflict, and maybe building business ties to Russia in order to increase European growth, which has suffered because of some of the measures that were taken in the last couple of years against Russia.
And of course, we'll see what happens going over the next year. Professor, thank you so much for being here.
You're very welcome.
Appreciate it.
Yep.
When we come back, Casey Decker has our debate fact check.
History isn't only what's happened. History is also what's happening. At the George Washington University, we're making history every day.
We pass legislation that shapes our lives, our culture, and our future.
We live the mantra, champions in the classroom, in the community, and in competition.
Which instills in us a determination to reach new heights.
We break new ground in the treatment of patients and the study of disease.
And tackle the most important challenges in our society.
We form new relationships and grow as entrepreneurs.
And we imagine new ways to connect on a global scale.
As alumni, we make history by supporting students.
We create scholarships that make an exceptional education attainable.
We provide tools and facilities that allow new ideas to come alive.
And we enhance UW's academics by attracting world-renowned faculty.
And delivering career-launching opportunities.
I'm making history.
I'm making history.
I'm making history.
The George Washington University is making a difference. The George Washington University is making history. Join us.
Welcome back. During our panel discussion, a team of fact-checkers monitored our debate. Casey Decker is here to fill us in on what we missed. Casey?
Andrew, a couple of alternative facts from both our debaters today. First, our conservative Andrew. He said that President Trump has banned international abortions. To be clear, the president doesn't have the authority to ban abortions abroad. He can, however, revoke federal funding to organizations that provide abortions abroad, and that's exactly what he did. His presidential memorandum reinstituted the Mexico City policy, which prohibits federal dollars from going to any organization that provides or promotes abortions. Andrew also said that President Trump canceled his meeting with Mexican President Peña Nieto. That's not true. It was Peña Nieto who canceled the meeting with Trump shortly after Trump signed executive orders aimed at beginning work on the wall. Finally, Andrew said that since the leftist Moral Mondays protests began in North Carolina, the GOP has actually picked up seats in the House and Senate. That's half true. The protests began in 2013. At that time, Republicans held 32 Senate seats. In 2014, they gained another 2, and then in 2016, they gained 1 more. But in the state House, Republicans went from 77 seats before the protests began to 74 seats in 2014. That number stayed the same in 2016. Now, as for our liberal debater Keiko, she said President Trump's cabinet is full of lobbyists. The cabinet does have a couple of former CEOs, but no professional lobbyists. There were, however, a number of lobbyists on his transition team. That's all for the fact check. Andrew?
All right, thanks, Casey. And now for Spilled Milk. Here's our tribute to the very best of late-night political comedy.
Today, my love has gone away. The bottle stands so long.
Now you realize what the CIA and FBI have to do. You know what they should do? They should start making little videos for Trump to watch. They should make news especially for him, because he's like a little child. They're gonna have to come out and make like a little production for him, just like beep, 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 beep. It's CIA news. Today, Donald Trump, the great Donald Trump, needs to know how to fight ISIS. And Trump will be like, yay, that's me. I'm on the news.
Going to the Women's March was like waking up from a nightmare to find that the monster was real, but all your friends were there with sticks and torches and unflattering hats to beat back the darkness. If only we'd known sooner that all you have to do to get white women to show up to a protest is to give them a craft.
Those around Trump are trying to get the cable news consumer-in-chief to be near a television less often. If you tried hiding the remote someplace he would never look, like under the Constitution?
But he was so mad, he made his press secretary, this guy Sean Spicer, who hadn't even had his first press conference yet, he made him gather the press immediately on a Saturday to yell at them. Here's Trump's press secretary, Sean Spicer. 연설하시겠습니다. Hold on, that's the wrong dictatorship.
All right, well, that's all for this episode of Colonial Crossfire. For all the latest updates from our political team at any time, be sure to follow us on Twitter and like us on Facebook. And check us out online at www.gw-tv.com. For all of us here at GW-TV, I'm Andrew Desiderio. Thanks for getting caught in the crossfire with us. We'll see you right back here next time.